hear me? Yeah, this is working. I feel like Britney Spears right now with this mic on. I must say as well, it's really nice seeing this many Brits abroad, and there's been no patio furniture thrown yet, so that's really great as well. But you have just had one beer, so we'll see in a few beers' time. So I'm the co-founder and CIO of Stadia. If you don't know my history, I'm the former head groundsman of Arsenal Football Club, where I was there for 14 and a half years. I took a very data-driven approach at Arsenal. That's how kind of my brain functions. I like numbers. I like to measure something, have a number to it, adapt, and then see if I've improved it or not improved it. And I also felt it was beneficial for me to talk up to management, having data and numbers and a presentation, rather than just going to them and saying, please give me lots of money, I just want my pitch to look green. So I felt it helped me. I was able to explain it easier. So yeah, that's kind of where we've gone to Stadia. I approached Jan, I think 7-8 years ago now. The company's been going 6.5 years. Part of when I was doing my sports turf degree, started to look at how the turf affected running speeds and fatigue of our players at Arsenal Football Club. So yeah, that's kind of where the idea started with Raw Stadia, and now we're operational in, I don't know what it was now, but around 30 countries in 4 different sports. So we've grown quite a lot, and we're trying to push a data-driven approach for sports turf management. So everything in sports is measured apart from the playing surface. Some of you will be like, well, we do measure the playing surfaces, and we do, like we use the Clegg Hammer, we use Moisture Pros, stuff like that. But this is really to show that we don't bring it into the world of sports performance. And sometimes that means previously there's been clashes. So sometimes there's been an injury on the pitch, and then all of a sudden they've said, hey, it must be down to the playing surface. Sometimes sports performance and coaches don't really understand what we do for the pitches. They don't understand the data either. So it's very hard to encompass within the sports performance department. And that's where we've really tried to be able to visualize it and be able to explain it within that kind of framework. So in sports performance, they measure as much of what affects the players as possible. So they measure the mood. So a bit like when you go through the airport, you hit the red, unhappy face, or you hit the smiley face that you're happy. They monitor the player's mood. They monitor what they're eating. They measure 250 GPS metrics. You see them wearing the little sports bras and stuff like that. They're measuring a lot of data, how they're sleeping, also their medical history. A big part of what affects the players, a big piece of that puzzle, what they're trying to get, the full picture, the full puzzle of what's affecting the player, a big external factor which influences the players is the surface they're running on. And that surface that they're running on affects every single player. Sounds pretty simple, right? But they have to tailor everything to each individual player, whereas if we can tailor the surfaces to our players, we can get more performance out of them, we can maybe reduce injury, and we can get a better longevity of the players. We can keep them on the fields for longer. So it's giving them that piece of the puzzle, enable them to understand it, and showing the actual importance of what we're all here for, what we do. Showing the importance of the job that we do to affect the players' performance. Because that's our job, right? Unless we're just gardeners and we're just going to stripe a lawn. No, we've got players playing on our pitches. It's for them. It's to get the most out of it. And it's not just about injury. So groundsmen all the time think, it's all down to me, it's all down to my surface, players got injured, I'm going to be blamed for it. You're wrong, okay? They have to look at all these elements because they all impact an injury. So when a player gets injured, he's gone on a journey to that injury. If it was solely down to the surface, then every player, as soon as they walk onto that surface, they'll drop down with ligament injuries and stuff like that, okay? there's a whole journey. They might be stressed from their wife at home. They might have just had a newborn baby that's keeping them up at night, so they're not sleeping very well. They might have had a sneaky McDonald's 3 days before. It could be anything that influences, and that's where the performance team are trying to know, they're trying to track what's affecting the players, because then they can adapt it to try and make it better and get more out of it, because they're playing more and more games. And, you know, we're all guilty of it. We want to see the best players play every single game, whether we like it or not. So that's their job. And part of that is also tracking how the surface performs and what you guys do on a day-to-day level at the training fields, but also where they perform on the main stage at the stadium. So when we're looking at what affects the players, we measure two aspects of the surface, or we're trying to replicate two aspects of a player. One is the vertical forces, so it's a foot landing on the ground, and it's understanding the effects of what that has on their body, but also the horizontal forces, so how they're twisting, how they're pushing off, how they're turning, how they're decelerating. These are all movements that are important to, obviously, the footballer and our game. So what affects the player? Well, first of all, the surface at the top. We have the time of year. Obviously, throughout the year, the pitch is going to change. No matter what you guys do, you try and make it as consistent as possible, but the time of year is going to have a big effect on that surface. The climate, so whether it's inside a stadium, whether it's outside, where in the world it is, it's all going to have differences to the surface. The actual maintenance that you guys do, the equipment you use, how you influence, how you affect the surface, is all going to affect that surface for that game, for that player to play on. The general surface type as well. So we've got a few construction companies here. Hybrid surface, natural surface. If it's got a high clay content or sand content, is all going to have different effects on our players. The best way I describe it is if you go for a run, if you run on concrete or you run on sand, you're going to feel the differences in your body. It's exactly the same for surfaces. The different surface types, you're going to have a different feeling from that surface. Then it affects the surface in a number of ways. So obviously the grass quality, the moisture, the grip, the hardness, stability is all going to affect everything to do with the game. The big one here, which we're going to touch upon, is the footwear selection. It's what connects the player to the surface is their boots. If they get that wrong, how does that affect their performance? The tactics and strategy. So there's been multiple research where if you have a very soft pitch, for example, you fatigue quicker. It's very hard to play quick, dynamic football. So you look for longer passes. It's proven in research. Things like that, you might think, how can I affect the game? Can't really. Well, fortunately, yes, you can. Faster surface, you will have more interchanges of play. They'll look for shorter passes and it'll be much more explosive. So you can affect the tactics and play of the team. Injury and fatigue, I touched upon it then. Yeah, we have an influence. We can minimize risk, but also we can push risk. We also work with clubs that don't want it in an optimum balanced range. They want their players to be more explosive, be quicker, push to the limit. That's also how we can manipulate the surface to encourage a better style of football or a better play for the people to watch at home on their TVs. And then obviously what affects the player, obviously the ball, the footwear. So when we're measuring two different aspects, we have the two machines to measure, one, the initial impact. So we call it the raw artificial athlete. So it's a weighted mass that hits the ground and we embed a sensor in there and it gives us 5 metrics back. One is the general firmness or hardness, so a bit like your loved Clegg hammer that we've used for so long. So it's generally measuring the top of the surface. The shock absorption, how much shock and vibrations are being taken by the surface. How much the surface moves when the foot hits the ground. It's also important for cushioning, for comfort. If the surface doesn't move very much, it's going to feel very firm. And that's where we've really seen like how the players feel a surface, because I've talked to a lot of groundsmen that say my pitch is clegging at 75 and they're bloody complaining that the pitch is hard. It's not, it's 75. Look, Well, actually, it can be down to how the surface deforms. So it's a different kind of mechanic of that soil that's moving, and that can have a really strong effect to how a player feels about a surface. How much energy is being returned? So we look at fatigue on that level and how running speeds, and then spring rate is how fast that energy is returned. So we also look at that at foot contact times. So for artificial surfaces, for instance, is a much slower spring rate. So the foot is engaged with the surface for longer. So that can tell us some interesting things about how players interact with an artificial surface compared to a natural. A lot of people say, well, it's kind of the same and stuff like that. Obviously, it's not. The players tell us it's not, and the foots are engaged for longer. We then measure the horizontal forces. So we measure, first of all, the stud depth, how the stud's getting into the soil. And we associate that with slipping. If there's more force needed for the studs to get into the soil, then the more likely there are when they're not planting their whole foot, when they're already trying to turn. They're not like me with a big club foot that just comes down and plants my foot every time. They're more explosive, they're more dynamic. If that stud needs more force to get in, like, I'm not saying it's Eddie's pitch is like this, but at this time of year, you get more organic builder. So you have more resistance for them studs to get in. So you need more force to get the studs through. So that's why you're more likely to slip. So it's also important to know that, to measure, to then recommend good footwear. Torque at 10, so it's the initial torque, the initial kind of turn. It's very rare on a rotation, a full rotation, that a player will pivot 90 degrees on the spot. Quite rare. Maybe happens sometimes, but relatively rare. Generally, we're looking at the initial grip and how that initial grip, how that stiffness of that surface can affect ligament strains, and especially if they're wearing the wrong footwear. We then visualize, so our devices are all connected directly to the platform, so there's no writing numbers down. I'm a former groundsman. I'm a big believer in trying to make things easy. The easier are things to do, to measure, the quicker they're onto the platform, the more likely you are to do it. I'm exactly the same. It's like the lights. They're really a pain in the ass to get out. You do think, shall we bother today or shall we leave it for the morning? So things have got to be easy, they've got to be connected. So the devices are all connected, and then we visualize it in different ways. We have a visualization for performance. So we have our little virtual man there, and he lights up in different ways. And it's just saying, hey, be careful, there's a high shock or a low deformation, this, and this can happen. So it's just giving them awareness from their level, in a high level. We then can flip it to the ground staff, and we can show, actually, you have upper level compaction. So your compaction is at the top, or maybe it's in the lower root zone. So now you need to know when to deep time aerate. So our devices can also help measure the differences in the profile to help you maintain the pitches more accurately. We then have automated advice. So we give advice, one to the groundsman and one to the performance team, like these are the pitch conditions, this, and this can help you improve it or alleviate it. We have a traffic light system. So we have the green, which is a balanced surface. Everyone thinks it's good or bad, but green is balanced, it's in the middle. Yellow is slightly above balance, yellow below is slightly below, red is far away from a balanced surface, and red is far below a surface, below a balanced surface. Why that's important is because some clubs actually want yellow. As groundsmen, we're like, it's yellow, can't believe it, my pitch is terrible, I need to do something. Well, actually, some clubs want yellow, and they want red. But when you go to yellow or red, you also increase the risk. So the more you come away from a balanced surface, the further or more risk that you create. Some clubs want to take risk, some clubs don't. Some players can handle that shock and that level of explosiveness. Some players can't. We've all been on a football pitch. Some of us perform very well, some of us don't. We'll all be able to handle different situations differently. And that's where if the performance staff can understand how they can use it to the team's advantage, then you can be a big part to that drive of the team and the club. We also look at the variability of the surface. So we also show the differences between zones. So if a player goes from one extreme to the other, that can also increase the risk. If you have a very consistent surface, then that's a slightly lower risk because they know what they're running on, their body's prepared for it. But if they're going from hard, soft, hard, that also increases the risk of certain injuries. So it's also something that we need them to be aware of. With the horizontal forces, so we've done a fair bit of work, worked with a number of boot manufacturers as well. So we look at how the boots are interacting with the surface, and we've released a new feature which shows the optimal boots to wear for the type of surfaces that have been measured. And that's really quite cool and quite innovative for groundsmen to be a part of. So you can measure, and then we can advise the footwear which is best suited for that surface condition. Will all the players listen? No. They'll still want to put their pink boots because it matches their shorts. That's okay. But we can start with the advice, and the more we can build that confidence, the more it will come. How we got there? So one club, we looked at, so this is research from Athol Thompson. Basically a soft ground boot, which is your kind of long studs, your old school kind of boot, gives you the highest amount of traction on every different surface type at every time of year. It's always the highest traction. Now we had a club at the start of last season. They measured their pitch, and one of their players, £45 million player, new signing, got injured, no one around him, done his knee ligament, was out for the whole season. So the groundsmen were like, I'm going to be blamed for this. So they asked us, we measured it, these were the conditions, can you kind of help us with anything? So we put together a little presentation. The player went on the pitch with a soft ground stud. It was a hybrid pitch, first game of the season. The pitch measured high traction. The player's then gone on with a high traction boot because he's gone from a club where maybe they didn't have hybrid pitches, or maybe he's not used to that kind of surface, and he's just gone with what he usually wears. Maybe what's lucky, could be any of them reasons, but he's gone with a high traction boot on a high traction pitch, which unfortunately means a higher risk for ligament strains. He also had a history of ligament strains. He also got a knock in the first half, which also destabilized his knee, weakened his knee. So it's also not just down to the surface. There's a series of processes which influence that injury, but the surface, and also more importantly, his choice of boot. If he had have chose a firm ground hybrid boot, his risk would have been lower. I'm not saying he wouldn't have got injured, but his risk would have certainly been lower. And that's the important thing to take from it. It's not always the groundsman's fault. We've got to get that out of our heads. I think we're always programmed to first point at us rather than ask the questions and go forward from there. It's also the player's fault. It's also the performance people's fault. It can be a number of people's fault. But it's about working together, learning why this has happened, and going together rather than trying to battle each other all the time. Down here, I don't know if all of you can see it. So we've done some research with our new traction device where we can put any foot plate on the bottom of it. So we can test different foot plates, different stud designs, different boots, and we can get quite a lot of information from it, which is really cool. So we tested a number of boots which are firm ground hybrid boots. So they're classed as the same boot. An Adidas boot to a Nike boot to an Ida boot will all give you different levels of traction. So if a player wears an Adidas Crazy Fast or an Ida Rise, they've also got different levels of risk for doing ligament. Nothing to do with the surface. It's all on the same surface, all different levels of traction. So just keep that in mind as well. It's down to how the boots are designed, the stud length, the shape of the stud, how that boot interacts with the surface. So we have hardware, so we make a number of hardware. So this is the traction device. I think we have some devices in the back. So we have our REA, which measures the traction. We have, the impact. We have the RTT, the raw traction tester. We're very innovative on our names. It measures the rotational traction, the horizontal forces, and that's where we can interchange boots. We can do a number of stuff with that. And then we have a load of agronomy equipment, so to be able to test the agronomy of the surfaces as well. And if you're with training pitches, I think I saw Eddie's one down there. I think Eddie's got a caddy down there. We have a device where you can attach all your equipment so it's nice and easy. Big believer in making it easy to collect the data so then you can use it much more freely. We also have raw pitch. So we have a density scanner. So with the device, you can measure the turf density, how green the pitch is, if you've got any stressed areas. So that's really handy. This club here, they were tracking their density over time, and they were tracking the usages, and they started to track the usage areas. So where the most used areas of the pitch were for that game. And you start to see, actually, the wear patterns start to match quite nicely the usage patterns. And we have another club that uses it for training grounds. So basically, one half of their pitch always gets worn out at this time of year, and the club are always like, guys, what is going on with this half of the pitch? Why is it always worn out? And they turned around with the usage map and said, well, it's because you use this half of the pitch, which is closest to the gate, 73% more than the other side. So if you can spread the wear, that also does us a real big favor. And because it was there in black and white, it was there tracked, they were like, oh, okay, yeah, my bad then. So it's quite useful sometimes to turn it the other way onto them. We bring in weather data. So like the picture before of like the complicated puzzle of what performance are tracking, we also have quite a complicated puzzle for groundsmanship or for maintaining pitches. If you just measure the density, it's not going to tell you a great deal if you have a problem. You need to fill in the puzzle pieces, because then if you have the complete puzzle, you have much more of an idea of why that disease took place or why your pitch isn't performing as well as last year. You need a complete picture. So that's why we bring in weather data, we give disease forecasting, we bring the calendar, all these kind of things into the platform to try and give you that complete puzzle rather than try missing bits. We're still not there as an industry. We're still going to learn a lot more as we go on, but it's an important thing to start tracking as a whole rather than just one or two things. Because I think sometimes we're an industry that, especially with data, we collect data, we stick it in the drawer, and then it's kind of forgotten about until 3 years later we clear out the drawer and, oh yeah, do you remember when we had that pitch tested? Like, we need to come away from that. We need to make data actionable. We need you to collect data and make an outcome. Why are you collecting it? What is it telling you? How can it be your advantage? That's the important thing. The calendar, it's a drag and drop system. So super easy, so you can drag and drop. If you're mowing, if you're fertilizing, aerating, you drag it over. And then here for disease, for example, if you drag disease, you can log where on the pitch you get disease, and then we can start tracking why you're getting disease, where you're most likely to get disease in that area, and all these kind of things. So Eddie, for example, I don't know if he's okay with me telling this, but he obviously grey leaf spot a few times. We also did in the Premier League, quite a few clubs got grey leaf spot. And we started to see a pattern with clubs tracking the disease on the platform, that actually the disease was starting in the top like northwest corner, which is normally like one of the most kind of strongest parts of the pitch. The reason why that was interesting is we then started to see the irrigation when they were putting the irrigation on, and a lot of them was doing a late evening irrigation when it was hot. So this area was staying hottest for the longest period. It was in the sun all day. Then the sun comes round and this area is in shade in the evening, and we apply water. So then this area stays wet for a longer period. And that's where disease can thrive in them sort of environments. So it's quite interesting, little things like that we can learn from a lot of data over time, or from multiple clubs. We give disease forecasting, we track weather data in the platform, as I said, for Stadia as well, not for Stadia, but for users of Stadia or for SGL. We also help clubs optimize their lighting usage. So we calculate DLI, and then we can show if you're over the threshold, maybe you don't need lighting today, or if you're lower, you might need more hours than maybe the previous day. So we can just make that a bit more efficient rather than just sticking the lights on and I'm just going to stick them on for 24 hours a day. We can be a bit more accurate with that now. And then we can track water presence and rainfall and whole other shebang of stuff. We then have data analytics. So it's kind of used quite loosely, but we bring all the data into one place. So we can do things like customized reporting, or we can start tracking the calendar data against the performance data, against the pitch data, against the weather data. Like, you guys can come with a problem and we can start playing with the data to make it actionable. It's not stuck in your drawer for 3 years doing nothing anymore. And that's the important stuff. We do things like this where we visualize the firmness of pitches, so you can have an overview of like which pitches are the firmest, which are the softest. So then you can start being a bit more accurate with your aeration maybe. Pitch 5 has suddenly become the firmest, maybe that's the next to be scheduled in for aeration. Another potential option. Obviously I'm up here today, quite an old slide now, but we've got quite a big team behind us now. I think we're 17 staff, something like that. So yeah, we're a big team. We have also experts with us, so Athol Thompson, Arne Jaspers, Yannick, who's here today as well. They help clubs understand performance data, understand boot choice. So Athol is a lead podiatrist, so he helps our clubs understand the boot data and the boot advice. So it's also important to have that expertise to be able to support clubs to understand data. If we measure data and you don't understand it and you can't make it actionable, yeah, then we're doing something wrong. So we want to be there to help you, guide you through the process and make it much more actionable. And then you can see a few familiar faces in the crowd. We also have our own developers, so we can create new features. Like, we're always getting clubs asking us for new features, new visualizations, and that's what we can create as well. Then we have a lot of research. So we have a research platform on our portal where you can go into. So all of our customers have access to a whole range of research papers. Knowledge, well, it's called the knowledge platform, so that kind of gives you, so we want to share that. We also build a lot of the advice into the platform, and as we learn, we adapt, so all our clubs can go on the journey with us together. Okay? And we're also available in 4 different languages, soon to be 5, so that's also a development that we've done recently, which is great. So yeah, that's my presentation. So you're still awake, I think. So yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Thank you, Reece.